Mike O'Connor. Mike has been a good friend of mine now for about 3 or 4 years. He and I met during men's fraternity. Really was pretty much, we met before that, but good to see you. And so we've been hanging out for the last 3 or 4 years, getting to know each other. He's got a powerful, impactful story of God continually pursuing him. And so
I got these just in case.
that's a good. I didn't bring those for you last time, so sorry. That's how
Getting weepy as I get older.
Yeah, you ready to go?
I am. If I go from red to purple, you'll be here, right?
Right down here.
Good morning. There's a lot of you out there. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. The original title of this story was I Should Have, I Am. That's what the title was when we went through the journey class and wrote our life stories. But when I got to thinking about it for this presentation, I thought it'd be a lot more appropriate to change it to the third time's the charm. And I think you'll see why that is, by the time we're done. So, let's go. I was sitting at a stop sign at the top of an exit ramp off of 494 in Plymouth, Minnesota. It was the fall of 1994 and I was 28 years old. I was alone. It was well after midnight and I was drunk. I was sitting at that stop sign too full of adrenaline to move after going 130 miles an hour down the interstate in a new Z28 Camaro I'd bought for myself some months earlier. The car was a gift to myself. That was a cool Camaro, by the way, back in those days. Trust me. The car was a gift to myself, some kind of moving on present after having divorced that spring from my first wife. The marriage had lasted less than 3 years, and I made the decision that week to move from Minneapolis to Milwaukee to take a new job and leave the last 6 years behind. I told myself a new life awaited in Milwaukee. I told myself I was taking control of my life and making a fresh start. Truth was, I was scared to death, and I didn't know what to do. The truth was, I was in a bad spot. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm convinced that God saved my life that night and that He saved it for a reason. The next week, I got rid of the Camaro, which was smart. It was either that or wind up dead or in jail. But I needed to do a lot more. I should have used that summer to think. Instead, I put 14,000 miles on that car in 4 months. True story. Drank myself silly and chased every girl that would talk to me. I should have taken the time to look at myself. I should have gone home to Iowa and gotten my life together. It was yet another in an already long list of should-haves that were starting to pile up. I was born on September 16, 1966 in Mason City, Iowa, to Ed and Marilyn O'Connor. I joined my older brother Jim, who was 2.5 at the time, and my parents named me Michael Corey. There. Aww. My dad was a blue-collar guy. After a couple of years in the Army, he worked construction for his older brother for a while, and then he was driving truck for Coca-Cola out of Mason City by the time I was born. When I was 1, we moved to Cresco, Iowa. And my sister Carrie came along when I was 3. She was adopted, and she rounded out our family of 5. God, we were cute, weren't we? When I was 4, we moved to Osage, Iowa, where all 3 of us graduated from high school and where my parents lived for 40 years until they moved to Cedar Falls a few years back when my dad had to go into the nursing home. Dad bought a Standard Oil station in Osage and proceeded to build a business that he ran for the next 22 years. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and life was simple. I can remember playing football and basketball with my friends, and I remember discovering racing with my dad. Racing was something that we did together. Dad sponsored cars through the O'Connor Standard. And it was a lifelong passion that we had together until Dad's death last month in April. When I was in the first grade, I had a bad accident that has impacted my life ever since. My brother and I were racing bicycles, and our bicycle race took us across the service drive of the gas station. I was trailing behind, and as we flew across the drive, I was trying to catch up, and one of the attendants came out right at that time, and I ran right into him. Flipped over the handlebars and right on the curb, my head. I was shaken up. I mean, it rattled me for sure, but I went home. And later that afternoon, though, I started to throw up, and I lost consciousness. And so we were lucky to be where we were geographically. They rushed me up to Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And I spent a week there with a bad concussion. A couple of decades later, though, after watching me struggle as an adult, my brother called me up and he wanted me to come to Iowa. He had a neurologist friend that wanted to do some tests. So they did that, and I sat through a series of tests, and the results were pretty enlightening. It was almost as if the doctor was some kind of late-night television psychic. He said, "I'll bet you have trouble with relationships. You have a hard time controlling your temper, don't you? I'll bet you don't do well in crowds. I'm guessing you've changed jobs several times." The list went on, and he had me pegged to a T. At the end of the day, there wasn't anything to be done. There wasn't any pill to be taken. There wasn't any surgery to have. But knowing did help. It helped to have some results, and to a certain degree, to know how I was took a little weight off myself. As I grew older as a grade schooler, I also grew fatter. Hang on. Fashion comes full circle, hey? Only a mother could love that picture. So, being a kid's tough. Being a fat kid is a particularly tough go. It affects your self-esteem in a big way, and anybody that gets beat on long enough gets worn down from it. I know I did. So despite all that, though, I was really an outgoing kid, and the older I got, however, though, the meaner it seemed kids were in school. And I really started to struggle socially. Thankfully, between my 8th grade and 9th grade years, I grew 6 inches and I lost about 20 pounds. The physical changes were pretty significant, but what I realized quickly is that I was who I was, and that people saw me a certain way, and being fat or skinny didn't really change that. Maybe being picked on for so many years made me sensitive, maybe it was the brain damage, but I didn't do well in the typical sarcastic give and take that is how most of us communicate. I wasn't good with a quick line, and I'm still not today. But my natural instinct is to avoid conflict and to be kind. So I found myself retreating inwardly. As a result, I felt very alone a lot of the time, and I find that I still feel that way today. I remember sitting in my room after marching in the Memorial Day parade one spring when I was a sophomore in high school, and I don't know really what triggered it or why it happened, but I just had this feeling wash over me. I felt empty and sad, and I sat in my room and I cried. And looking back, that was for sure my first bout of depression, something that I found out as an adult runs in the family. But I didn't know that at the time. I should have said something to somebody. I should have talked to my parents, but I didn't. I was thought of as a good kid, and as a result, most of the teachers in school liked me. One of the teachers I got along well with was our head football coach, Mike Woodley, who was also the high school gym teacher. Some of you here in the Cedar Valley probably remember Mike. He was an East High grad. He was a star at UNI. He coached on Dan McCarney's staff. I'll forgive him that. At ISU. And then most recently, he took Grandview to the NAIA National Championship. So he stood out, man. I looked up to him. And one day he said to me, I don't know what happened in gym class, but he looked at me in front of the other kids and he said, "O'Connor, you are a parent's dream." He was a little more descriptive than that. You get the idea. Man, looking back on it, I don't know if that was a compliment or not, but that's how I took it. Man, I had pretty low self-esteem, and I was painfully shy around girls, so that should have given me all the confidence in the world. But it didn't for some reason, and I kind of limped through the rest of high school. I did what I needed to do to survive it. I had enough friends to where it wasn't all that bad, but I couldn't wait to move on. I thought things would be different if only I could start over somewhere else. So I went to Nyack in Mason City my first 2 years of college, and I had it in my head I was going to be a businessman. I thought that even though, according to my Iowa Basic Skills results, that wasn't a very good idea. Most business people are good at math, you see. They're linear thinkers. Me, not so much. My test results said I should be some sort of writer. You'd think that our high school guidance counselor would have said, "Hey, dummy, maybe you should go to Iowa. You might have heard they got a pretty good journalism school down there." But it didn't happen. I should have taken some time to really look at my strengths and weaknesses, but I didn't. I just kind of kept moving forward, and thinking wasn't really a big part of my daily routine. I turned 19 a week after I got to Nyack, which meant I was legal to drink in those days. And that wasn't a good deal for me because I wasn't very good at drinking. I found that my drinking train had no caboose. I used alcohol as a crutch and as a means of making me feel more comfortable socially and as an escape, and I've struggled with that throughout my adult life. There was a point where, in college, where I got into a situation where I was seeing a girl who decided to see somebody else, and I ended up having a drunken altercation with her front door. The door was the only one that got hurt, but my dad got wind of it, and he came to see me. I think he felt guilty because he was a drinker in social settings, and he didn't have much of a caboose either. And he felt guilty that it was somehow his fault that I was the same way. He told me they could get me some help if I needed it. There were no interventions in those days, and I said I didn't need the help. Looking back, I did, and I should have taken it. But my parents were born in the 40s, and we were a small-town Catholic family. We didn't talk about feelings. So I didn't appreciate how much courage it took for my dad to come see me and confront me with this and confront some of his own shortcomings at the same time. He had to have had tremendous feelings of guilt and responsibility, and I should have told him years ago, before the dementia swallowed him up, that it wasn't his fault, that he and Mom gave us all a better example than I was following, and that my bad decisions were mine and mine alone, and had nothing to do with him or the job he'd done as a father. But Dad's gone now, and it's too late. There was something else I discovered in college that I've struggled with my entire adult life: women. I was right that a change of scenery would do me good in that regard. Nobody knew me, so there were no pre-established notions about who I was. I was a decent-looking guy. Don Johnson, eat your heart out now. You don't know that, Google it. Crockett and Tubbs. And so anyway, I did well with girls and with grandmas, as you can see. That should have been a good thing, but it wasn't. It made me feel wanted, successful somehow, feelings that I didn't have in high school. Rather than trying to be a good guy and trying to find meaningful relationships, I was all about what was around the next corner. There was no joy in it, but it's what I did, and for whatever reason, I did it for a long time. I worked a series of jobs and took out loans to pay for college, but by the time I was going into my senior year, I was out of money. At UNI, I'd transferred from Nyack. So I took a job that summer selling books door to door for the Southwestern Company out of Nashville, Tennessee. Anybody ever knocked on your door doing that? Southwestern is a Christian company, and during training they had Amy Grant and then her then husband Gary Chapman come perform for us, and I started to think a bit during that time about God and faith. It was the first time I intentionally thought about God as an adult, and I remember feeling like I wanted to explore my faith, but I didn't know how. I worked in and around Lumberton, North Carolina that summer with other college kids from Iowa, and I did well. The job was to knock on at least 60 doors a day and sell whoever opened the door a series of Encyclopedia Britannica books. Now, using in your 20s, again, you're just like Crockett and Tubbs, you got no idea. But trust me, there was no internet back then, and us old people used encyclopedias to figure out what we needed. So, anyway, I was doing a service, right? I struggled at first, but I had some breaks early on, and I found my stride. I had no car, so I rode around on a 3-speed girl's bike. It's true. I bought off a girl I met in Lumberton. She took pity on me, I think, and I gave her, there he is. Look at that guy. Good gracious. All right, so I gave her $25 and she gave me the bike. So anyway, I was 1,500 miles away from home, determined to succeed, and I did. I finished 33rd out of 3,000 first-year kids. And I came home with a check for almost $6,000. That was a lot of money in '87. In the process, I lost about 25 pounds and began my senior year at UNI in the best shape mentally and physically of my life. That should have been the springboard, but it wasn't. When I got back to UNI, I met a kid that came for money, and since I had a pocket full of money, we partied like we were freshmen. And I remember vividly giving the last $10 I had to the cab driver on New Year's Eve that drove us home. In 4 months, I'd gained 45 pounds. I was failing miserably in school, and I was about at the lowest point of my young life. My mom bailed me out and got me a loan to finish college. And in the fall of 1989, I went to work for the Principal Financial Group in their group office in Minneapolis. I got that job because of what I'd done the summer before in North Carolina, not because of the 2.59 grade point average with which I limped out of UNI. The effort I'd shown and success I'd had with the Southwestern Company stood in stark contrast to my lack of success as a student. I hope you guys that are graduating today from high school will hear this part. It's embarrassing to me not to have tried harder and worked harder than I did when I was in college. I was raised to be better than that. My parents taught me how to work, not how to be lazy. Not applying myself better in college is one of the greatest regrets of my life, and it bothers me to this day. The group insurance sales job at the Principal was the plum position to have with that company. Group insurance was their number one line, and they only chose the best and the brightest to fill those seats. I had an office looking out over the downtown Minneapolis, 6th floor of the Pillsbury Center, if you've ever been there. I had a company car, and I had my own private secretary. Once again, I had the world by the tail, but I let it go. I was an immature 22-year-old, and it was a lot to live up to. I found it hard to regain the confidence and the drive that propelled me the summer I sold books, and I also struggled to fit in with the other people in the office. I was a falsely confident kid with poor social skills and a very fragile psyche. And after 2 years, I more or less flunked out. I wasn't fired, but it was clear that the manager of the office preferred I leave. I was given the option to figure it out, but I didn't. I decided to move on. I quit. It was easier. Fast forward to Milwaukee. The time I spent in Milwaukee I refer to now as the lost years. Milwaukee is a good town with good people, even though they're all Packer fans from birth. Skol Vikings. Milwaukee is really a hazy memory to me. I spent my time there running from my past in Minneapolis and mindlessly trying to stay above water. I met Allison Davis while I lived there. She was in the process of divorcing from her husband, whom she had moved with to Milwaukee from Atlanta, and they were there for his job, and like me, she was all alone. We had a volatile relationship from the word go, but it had been 10 years since I'd been married before, and I more or less let her talk me into it. And I know that sounds ridiculous and stupid, and I was an idiot for doing it, but it's what it was. And I can't change it. I can't go back. We moved from Milwaukee to Atlanta shortly after we were married, and while we were there, we found out Allison was pregnant. I think we were both close to ending the marriage, just saying, hey, this was a mistake. Before that news came, but once it did, we resolved to make it work. So I found a job running a branch office of a Dallas-based company in Cleveland, Ohio, and yet again I was far away from home, far away from family, and in a bad personal relationship. But there's one good thing that came out of that marriage, and her name is Emma. Emma Grace O'Connor was born in Lakewood, Ohio on February 5th, 2003. Allison had a really difficult labor when the baby's heartbeat went down. They did an emergency C-section. Emma's birth made me realize that it wasn't all about me, and that it was time for me to step up and be a man and provide for my family. Despite a change in my outlook, we lived in Cleveland for what turned out to be less than a year. I tried hard, I really did, but I wasn't ready to be a manager at that time, and it showed. So we parted ways with a skinny severance check, no clear direction, and a little baby that we had an itching feeling something wasn't quite right with. We didn't know what to do. So Allison suggested we move to Iowa. I was speechless. I'd wanted to get back some way for years, but I never could figure out how to do it. And now moving home seemed like all we could do. So we packed up a U-Haul, we moved to Osage, and we moved in with my parents. Moving back was fine. I mean, it was great. But moving with my parents was a gigantic blow. At 35 years old, I felt like a complete and total failure. I found some work with a buddy of mine from high school, and we rented a place a couple of blocks from my folks. Eventually, I found a job as a sales rep with an advertising agency here in Cedar Falls, and I commuted it for 8 months before we moved. I just wanted to feel safe that it was going to work out. I determined, though, when I took that job, that I had no other choice but to succeed. The same determination I had when I sold books. At 3 months, I was a manager. Within 6 months, I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life. So we found a nice home in Waterloo and we moved. But things were not good in our marriage, and worse yet, Emma was not coming along. Emma wasn't developing like she should have. It was then that we first heard the word autism from a pediatrician who examined Emma for an earache. I didn't really know what autism was, and I was so swept up in trying to provide that I didn't find out much more about it. And then within 6 months, Allison asked for a divorce. I wanted out of the marriage, there's no question, but I loved my little girl, and I knew Allison would want to move back to Atlanta. Rather than fight it, I just kept shuffling my feet. I decided that I couldn't keep her in Iowa without family for support. So we divorced, and Allison and Emma moved to Atlanta. I'll never forget the day they left. At the airport, they flew out of Waterloo, and Allison had Emma, and she was walking away to get on the plane. And Emma was over her shoulder, and she said, she was slow to speech, and she said, "Bye. Bye." She didn't know where she was going or why she was going, and she didn't know that she wasn't coming back. Shortly after that, my brother said he wanted to talk. He told me that maybe it was best that I take this opportunity to step out of Emma's life. He was coming from a good place, and he, excuse me, I'm sorry. What he said spoke to my character at the time, but it still broke my heart. I couldn't believe he actually said that to me. In retrospect, I shudder to think what would have happened if he hadn't. For probably the first time in my life, I stopped to think, stopped to do some self-reflection. When I was done, I determined that I'd do whatever it took to have a relationship with Emma, and that she'd know her daddy loved her despite the distance between us. I was very fortunate to have a manager that had my back, and I started leaving out on Thursday afternoons once a month for a long weekend with Emma. At work, my job was to close deals. It was a sales rep's job to warm them up, and my opportunity to come in and close them. So there were 3 managers and 20 or so sales reps, and the sales reps could work with whoever they wanted to. So you had to have the sales reps on your side, and I was struggling with that. I was angry in general back then. I was angry at how things had gone in my life, and I was angry that my lot in life was pitching weekend sales to car dealers. But all of our debt and a huge child support payment was on my shoulders. Plus, I had to be able to afford to fly to Atlanta every month, rent a car, rent a hotel room. So I had no choice but to buck up. Somewhere in the midst of all this chaos, God sent me a guardian angel. I had been talking to God a lot since Allison and Emma left, and he must have been listening, although this angel appeared in the most unlikely form. One of our senior sales reps, a person who had worked only a handful of deals with me ever, and seemed to despise me, took it upon herself to offer some less than friendly advice. Advice that helped me turn my life around. The angel's name was Julie Schumann, and her advice to me was pretty simple. She said, "Stop being a jerk." She used a different noun. But jerk will do for a Sunday morning at church, right? I'm pretty sure her suggestion came right after she told me I was patronizing and condescending. It was quite a slap in the face, but something I needed for sure. I went home and I thought long and hard about what Julie said, and the next day I came in with a different attitude. As I started to treat people better, I naturally started to let the real me come out, the guy that genuinely cares, the guy that wants to help, the guy that wants to make an impact in others' lives. Not surprisingly, things improved in both my personal life and my professional life. Eventually, Julie decided I wasn't such a jerk after all, and we started dating, and on December 30th, 2006, we were married right here at Orchard Hill. It was a beautiful wedding, by far the nicest of my three. It's all right, you can laugh at that. Dale Earnhardt was married 3 times. I still give her grief because she didn't have it videotaped. I finally married for love. Imagine that. And it's a good thing because we've been through a tremendous amount in 10 years, things that I would have walked away from for sure in previous versions of myself, but I haven't done that. Together we've stuck and we've stayed, and I'm so glad for that. As I look back and reflect on my life to this point, it's clear to me that God was at work in some small and some major ways through people He put in my life at critical times. He never stopped pursuing me. And at every failure, there was a new beginning. First, God used my big brother to confront me with my brokenness and force me to take a hard look at myself and my priorities. Second, at one of the lowest points in my life, God gave me a manager with a huge heart who allowed me to establish a bond with my little girl. Third, God redirected my life through the surprising, gracious gift, if you can say being called a jerk is a gracious gift, of my wife. Seriously, I have no idea where I'd be if it weren't for Julie, and I hate to think about her not being in my life. Julie has helped me to have a personal relationship with Jesus and to seek and find my own genuine faith life. She's helped me to have the confidence to find opportunities to serve at Orchard and brought out the servant heart in me that I think I always had, but I'd buried it for most of my life. She's helped me to see the good in myself and for the first time in my life really see who I am. I am a good and loving husband. I am a good father. I am a good son. I am a good and trustworthy friend. I've come to realize that I've lived in fear for most of my 49 years. Fear of bullying, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of rejection, fear of love. No more. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I'm a child of God. The third time really was the charm. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. Well done. I told Mike after he shared his story in Waverly, I'm amazed at the part where he shares about how he had worked so hard and he was trying to find a way home when he moved back. And although he was at the bottom, he was looking to try to get back home. And I think that metaphorically that's true in all our lives, that God is trying to help us find a way back home with Him. And He will use every means possible to get us there, and we see that in your life, so I appreciate you sharing that. Can I pray for you?
Yeah.
Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for Mike and for his story and for his willingness to share that story with us this morning. I pray that, Lord, as we reflect on that, we'll find encouragement in our own lives, and we'll see, Lord, the ways you're at work in all of our lives through rebukes and corrections and sometimes strong words, but also through acts of kindness and mercy and grace, putting people in our path with a great message of hope for us and blessing us with special gifts along the way. You're an amazing, amazing God, and we thank you for your presence. I want to thank you for Julie and for the role that she has played in Mike's life, and I pray blessing over Mike and Julie's marriage, and also just as he continues to grieve the loss of his dad. Be with him as he walks each day, remembering him and honoring you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.